There is a phrase that circulates quietly among people who have spent serious time studying wealth building. It is often credited in various forms to investors and financial thinkers who have watched this pattern repeat itself again and again. The first $100,000 is the hardest. Everything after that becomes progressively easier. It sounds almost too simple to be true. Money is money. A dollar earned at the beginning should be no different from a dollar earned later. But the people who have actually walked this path, who have built wealth slowly and watched the process unfold in real time, consistently describe the same experience. The climb to the first 100,000 feels brutal. The climb to the second 100,000 feels different, faster, lighter, almost like the money itself starts helping. This video explains why that happens, not through motivation, through mathematics, psychology, and the structural realities of how wealth actually accumulates. Let us start with the mathematics, because this is where the pattern becomes undeniable. Imagine someone consistently saving and investing $500 per month, earning an average annual return of 8%. A reasonable long-term historical average for a diversified stock market index. To reach the first $100,000 from zero, starting with nothing, this person needs approximately 12 years of consistent monthly investing. 12 years of discipline, of resisting lifestyle inflation, of choosing to invest instead of spend month after month, while watching the account balance grow with frustrating slowness in the early years. But here is where the pattern shifts. To go from $100,000 to $200,000 at the same monthly contribution and the same average return takes approximately 6 years. Half the time, to go from $200,000 to $300,000 takes even less time than that. Each subsequent $100,000 milestone arrives faster than the one before it, not because the person is saving more money each month, but because the money already invested is increasingly doing the work itself. This is the mechanism of compound growth made visible in a way that is genuinely difficult to feel until you see the numbers laid out. In the early years of investing, almost the entire growth of an account comes from new contributions. The person putting in $500 a month is essentially watching their own deposits accumulate, with a relatively small amount of investment growth layered on top. But as the account grows larger, the math quietly reverses. 8% growth on $10,000 is $800. 8% growth on $100,000 is $8,000. 8% growth on $500,000 is $40,000. At a certain point, the investment growth in a single year becomes larger than the total amount the person is contributing through their own monthly effort. The portfolio begins generating more wealth in a year than the person can generate through saving alone. This is the moment many investors describe when they say the money starts working harder than they do. It is not a metaphor. It is a mathematical threshold that occurs predictably once a portfolio reaches sufficient size. But the mathematics only explains part of the difficulty. The psychological experience of the first $100,000 is its own separate challenge entirely. In the early years of saving and investing, the visible progress is almost non-existent. A person contributing $500 a month might check their account after an entire year and see a balance of roughly $6,500. After 2 years, perhaps $14,000. The growth feels achingly slow, especially when compared to the effort and sacrifice required to consistently set that money aside. This is where a significant number of people give up, not because the strategy is flawed, but because the early visible reward is so small relative to the discipline required that the entire effort starts to feel pointless. Behavioral economists refer to this as a motivation gap, the space between the effort being exerted and the reward being perceived. And it is widest precisely during the years when compounding has not yet accumulated enough mass to become visually meaningful. The people who reach the first $100,000 are not necessarily the people who started with more money or earned higher returns. They are disproportionately the people who continued contributing through the years when the results did not yet feel real. There is also a structural reality worth understanding clearly, because it explains why so many people quietly stall before reaching this milestone. The first significant portion of anyone's investing journey typically coincides with the most financially unstable years of adult life. Early career income, which is often the lowest income a person will earn across their working life. Major life expenses arriving in quick succession. Housing costs, transportation, sometimes education debt, sometimes the early costs of starting a family. The first $100,000 is frequently being built during the exact period when life is also demanding the most from a person's income. This is not a coincidence of bad luck. It is simply the typical sequence of adult financial life. And understanding that the difficulty is structural, not personal, changes how people relate to the slowness of those early years. It removes some of the self-blame that often accompanies a process that, by its very nature, was always going to feel slow at the beginning. Now consider what changes once someone crosses that first major threshold. Beyond the pure mathematics of compounding, something psychological shifts as well. The account balance becomes large enough to feel real, to feel like genuine progress rather than an abstract concept. This shift in perception often increases motivation and consistency, which further reinforces the financial momentum already building from the compounding itself. There is also a practical financial shift that occurs. A portfolio of meaningful size opens access to more sophisticated financial planning, more diversified investment options, and in many cases, more serious long-term thinking about wealth as an ongoing process rather than a distant, abstract goal. The combination of mathematical acceleration and psychological reinforcement is why so many people who reach this milestone describe everything afterward as feeling fundamentally different from everything before it. It is worth being clear about what this video is not claiming. This is not a guarantee that any specific outcome will occur for any individual. Market returns vary. Personal circumstances vary enormously. Some years produce strong growth, other years produce flat or negative returns, and patience through those periods is part of the process, not a sign that something has gone wrong. What the data consistently shows is the pattern itself, the relationship between time, consistency, and the mathematics of compounding. It does not promise a specific number by a specific date. It explains why the structure of wealth building feels disproportionately difficult at the beginning and progressively more manageable as it continues. Assuming consistent participation over a long period of time, the most useful insight in all of this is not really about the number 100,000 specifically. That figure is simply large enough to make the pattern visible and small enough to feel achievable within a normal working lifetime. The real insight is about what the early years of any long-term financial effort actually feel like, and why so many people abandon the process during the exact period when the underlying mathematics is quietly setting up everything that comes afterward. The first stretch of any meaningful financial journey will almost always feel slower and harder than logic suggests it should. That is not evidence of failure. It is simply the nature of compounding before it has had enough time to compound. The people who eventually experience the acceleration are in nearly every case simply the people who remained consistent through the years before it became visible. That patience, more than any single investment decision, tends to be the real foundation of long-term financial change.